my fellow freedom lovers, sovereign thinkers. Thank you for tuning to the LL3 podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date is Thursday, April 29th, 2021. Yes, a little history lesson today on this history. Today on 1992, this day in history, of course. The horrific events began with the riots in Los Angeles after the Rodney King verdict, when the officers were found not guilty. And I know there's a lot of infiltrators in there trying to stir up stuff. Got all the gangs and riffraff, never cared. Hey, it's time to loot, shoot, and injure, violate. And we all know, too, Police Chief Daryl Gates resigned later on, but he's the one who created the SWAT team. Now we see it everywhere. In the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. Started SWAT, and they made a big TV show. I used to watch when I was a kid. Now I can give two craps about it. I'm sorry. Police state tactics, all that. There are times you always gotta see things a lot brighter, broader, observantly, and so forth. And even the late Bill Cooper said the stupidest thing they done is have people fight amongst each other. They should have all rallied in unison and went down to City Hall and the police station, surrounded where Police Chief Gates is and the system itself to stop the madness. So it's a great opportunity to do it. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Rodney King was a saint, may his soul be forever free. But he exhibited himself poorly by lunging at one of the officers, including to, I think it was Mr. Holliday's camera. He was surrounded. He lunged at an officer. That's why he got acquitted the first time, because the lawyer he had was some showman who wants to exploit it to the core and say the officers are guilty before having a trial. It backfired on him. That exploitation, other words, the Lizzie Borden syndrome, I call it, happened with her. The whole axe murdering of her mother-in-law and not mother-in-law, stepmother and the father, and they believe she was the prime suspect. Of course, that town in Massachusetts, I don't have the name of it, unfortunately, on top of my head. Did a grand jury, they all believe she was guilty. The hype and hoopla. And of course, during the time of the jury trial, she was acquitted. Everyone was dumbfounded, baffled. That's just one of those things, folks. Never fall for the hype. Look what happened with the Derek Chauvin case. Very similar. And there's, I'm not like people believe that agree with me that his procedures were incorrect. I chat with the bounty hunter and a former police officer, deputy and all that. Okay, said the same thing. But they just bum rushed him immediately. Boom, and have the rest of the suspects in there right now, waiting for his case first. He spearheaded, exploited, gave the family $27 million before jury selection. Mob rule mentality. Lizzie Borden syndrome. It is disturbing. And it's like bizarro world, of course. It's like even with the president's white privilege, Joe Biden's speech. I did a rant on it yesterday. And it's like, a lot of them just were falling asleep. Could I blame them? And I was like, oh, look, Senator Ted Cruz is asleep. I was like, hey, I don't blame him because it was awful, stupid, lousy. His speech makes George W. Bush a true genius. Okay? Plain and simple. So obvious. And Joe Biden's been like that for a very long time. That's his habit. He's deep state approved. Okay? Everything handed to him. White privilege 46, that's what I call him. He's a very prime example of that title. He earned it for a very long time. And I'm not going to repeat myself what I said yesterday, but it's very hilarious. And we're going to talk on a couple of articles pertaining to this. Like I said before, and I still say it again, he is a bend-over Bob to the New World Order or a globalist butt boy, Club of Rome stooge, etc. Doesn't matter. And of course, how we can fight it. So we're going to start off here by Richard Poe, who wrote this from LouRockwell.com. Great site, folks. I encourage everyone to check it out. And I haven't really did any commentary on his articles on his page. I always enjoy this stuff. So here's what Richard Poe says: how the British invented globalism. More patriots agree that we're fighting something called globalism. But what is it? First and foremost, it is a British invention. Modern globalism was born in Victorian England and later promoted by Britain's Fabian socialists. It's now the dominant belief system of today's world. George Orwell called it INGSOC, I-N-G-S-O-C. In his novel 1984, Orwell foretold a future in which the British Empire merges with the United States to form Oceania, a superstate driven by an evil ideology called INGSOC, an abbreviation for English socialism. INGSOC, okay. Orwell's dystopia was based on his knowledge of actual globalist plans. Federation of the world. As British power expanded in the 19th century, global dominion seemed inevitable. Imperial administrators led plans for a world unite under British rule. The key making it work was to join forces with the United States, just as Orwell described in his novel. Other Anglophiles in the U.S. were more eager to go along with his plan. We are part, and a great part, of the Great Britain, which seems so plainly destined to dominate this planet. Enthused, the New York Times in 1897, during the festivities for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee. In 1842, Alfred Tennyson, soon to become Queen Victoria's official poet laureate, wrote the poem Locksley's Hall, in a vision of a golden age of peace under universal law, a parliament of man and the federation of the world. Tennyson's words foreshadowed the League of Nations and the UN, but Tennyson did not invent these concepts. He merely celebrated plans already underway among British elites. Generations of British globalists have cherished Tennyson's poem as if it were Holy Writ. Winston Churchill praised it in 1931 as the most wonderful of all modern prophecies. He called the League of Nations a fulfillment of Tennyson's vision. Liberal imperialism. Another British leader influenced by Tennyson's poem was philosopher John Ruskin. In his first lecture at Oxford in 1870, Ruskin electrified students by declaring it was Britain's destiny to reign or die, to rule the world or be ruled by others. With these words, Ruskin gave birth gave birth to a doctrine that would soon come to be known as liberal imperialism. The notion that liberal countries should conquer barbarous ones in order to spread liberal values. A better name would be socialist imperialism, as most of the people who promoted this concept were actually socialists. Ruskin called himself a communist before Marx had finished writing Das Kapital. In Ruskin's view, the British Empire was a perfect vehicle for spreading socialism. Ruskin's socialism was strangely mixed with elitism. He controlled the superiority of the northern race, by which he meant the Normans, Celts, and Anglo-Saxons who built England. He was he saw the aristocracy, not the common people, as the embodiment of British virtue. Ruskin was also an occultist, and according to some biographers, a pedophile. In these respects, his eccentricities resembled still fashionable in certain globalist circles today. The Rhodes Trust. Ruskin's teachings inspired a generation of British statesmen. One of the most devoted Ruskinites was Cecil Rhodes, 1853 to 1902. As an undergraduate, Rhodes heard Ruskin's inaugural lecture and wrote out a copy of it, which he kept for the rest of his life. As a statesman, Rhodes aggressively promoted British expansion. The more of the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race, he said. In his will, Rhodes left a fortune to promote British rule throughout the world, federation of all English-speaking countries, and the ultimate recovery of the United States as an integral part of the British Empire. All of this was supposed to lead to the foundation of so great a power as to hereafter renders war impossible and promote the best interests of humanity. Rhodes concluded in his will. Thus, world peace would be attended through British hegemony. By the 1890s, most British leaders agreed with Rhodes. The Round Table. Following Rhodes' death in 1902, Alfred Milner took over his movement, setting up secretive roundtable groups to propagandize for a worldwide federation of English-speaking countries. In each target country, including the U.S., the roundtablers recruited local leaders to act as Judas goats. A Judas goat is an animal trained to lead others to the slaughter. In fact, the roundtable was leading people to a literal slaughter. A war with Germany was expected. The roundtable sought commitments from English-speaking colonies to send troops. Then, when the time came, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and South Africa agreed. World War I pushed the world toward globalism, giving the rise to the League of Nations. This was by design, British design. Generations of school children have learned that Woodrow Wilson was the father of globalism. But Wilson's ideas were spoon-fed to him by British agents. Of course, and remember, Woodrow Wilson was a racist, a Ku Klux Klan sympathizer. You figure that one out, right? War to end war. On August 1914, only 10 days after England declared war, novelist H.G. Wells wrote an article headlined, "The War That Will End War. This is now a war for peace," he declared. It's aimed at a settlement that shall stop this sort of thing forever. Wells released a book version of the War That Will End War in October 1914. He wrote, if liberals throughout the world will insist upon a world conference at the end of this conflict, they may set up a peace league that will control the globe. Wells did not invent the idea of a peace league. He was simply promoting official British policy. Wells was a secret operative for Britain's War Propaganda Bureau known as Wellington House. British agents in the White House. British leaders understood that peace league would never work without U.S. support. For that reason, British intelligence made special efforts to penetrate the Wilson White House, which proved surprisingly easy. Wilson's closest advisor, Colonel Edward House, a Texan with strong family ties to England. During the Civil War, House's British-born father made a fortune as a blockade runner, trading cotton for British munitions to arm rebel troops. Young Edward House and his brothers attended English boarding schools. While advising President Wilson, Colonel House worked closely with British spies, especially Sir William Wiseman, the U.S. Station Chief for Britain's Secret Intelligence Service, SIS. House, Wiseman, and Wilson became intimate friends, even vacationing together. The idea for a League of Nations came from Sir Edward Grey, Britain's Foreign Secretary. In a letter of September 22nd, 1915, Grey asked Colonel House if the president could be persuaded to propose a League of Nations, as the idea would be better received coming from a U.S. president. When Wilson attended the Paris Peace Conference in 1919, Wiseman and his House were close at hand, guiding his every move, along with a bevy of other British and U.S. officials, all committed to the globalist agenda, and many tied directly to the Round Table. A special relationship. Former SIS officer John Bruce Lockhart, later called Wiseman, the most successful agent of influence the British ever had. British historian A.J.P. Taylor wrote that he, Wiseman, and House made a special relationship a reality. Many historians hold that the U.S.-UK special relationship began only after World War II with the creation of NATO and the UN. However, Taylor correctly notes that the seeds of the special relationship were planted earlier at the Paris Peace Conference of 1919. In Paris, the U.S. and UK officials secretly agreed to coordinate policy so that both countries would act as one. Two think tanks were created to facilitate this: Chatham House from the UK and the Council of Foreign Relations in the United States. The two distress of British globalists, the U.S. Senate refused to join the League of Nations. It took another world war and the persuasive talents of Winston Churchill to finally draw the U.S. into global government via NATO and the UN. Winston Churchill, father of modern globalism. Churchill's vision of global government was oddly similar to that of Cecil Rhodes and the Round Table. Churchill called for a world organization backed by a special relationship between English-speaking countries. On February 16, 1944, Churchill warned that unless Britain and the United States are joined in a special relationship with the ambit of a world organization, another destructive war will come to pass. Accordingly, the UN was founded on October 24, 1945. However, the UN was not enough. Cecil Rhodes, the Round Table, had always maintained that the true power blend in a global government must be a union of English-speaking people. Churchill repeated this plan in his Iron Curtain speech of March 5, 1946. Churchill warned that the UN had no international armed force or atomic bombs. The United States must therefore join with Britain and other English-speaking countries in the military alliance. Churchill argued no other force could stop the Soviets. Fraternal Association of the English-speaking People. Churchill stated that the world organization was useless without the Fraternal Association of the English-speaking People. This means a special relationship between the British Commonwealth and Empire and the United States. Churchill's words led to the 1949 NATO Treaty and the Five Eyes Agreement, pulling intelligence efforts by the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Step by step, Churchill drew us even closer to the global superstate, Orwell called Oceania. A self-described Tory anarchist, Orwell hated Soviet communism. If he could have written 1984 as a sort of British Red Dawn, with England groaning over Soviet occupation. But that was not Orwell's message. Orwell warned of a danger closer to home. He warned of British globalists and their plans for a union of English-speaking countries, driven by Ingsoc ideology. In many respects, the world we inhabit today is the world Orwell foresaw. Very interesting, Mr. Poe wrote. And it makes a lot of sense. Club of Rome. Some people still believe the United States is still a British colony. It's been like that for a very long time. Foreign influences infiltrate a lot of nations, including here. John Jay warned us about this in Federalist Papers 235, and of course, Washington's farewell address. Self-explanatory. I encourage everyone to read that. It's just an example of what's been happening, and a lot of good people suffered from it. I've always believed the United States should be a republic, not an empire. No more of these piss-poor excuses, because a lot of this stuff has been done by design very long time. They're doing it right now. They want to try to pull something, a few wars together, and that will only benefit them, not anyone else. The Rothschilds, the banksters, yep, they're involved. A lot of these wars have been happening. Most of these wars have been bankster funded since 1742, according to some of the stuff I've read. They can go further than that. So I do find this very chilling. You're all on the same page, folks. All have to pay attention. Cui bono, who benefits? All about the control game. We got agents everywhere, including white privileged Biden had the audacity to think Washington, D.C. should revolve around them. We the people. Them. Think about, we're the elite, you're the peasants. And here's the thing we can do to counter it. Of course, we got to try to infiltrate that as well. In the U.S., you can do this in even other areas of the world. Local nullification, a way to fight both state and federal despots. This is by James Kettler from Mises.org, Mises Wire. Throughout American history, decentralists have championed states' rights as the winning strategy for freedom. But what if that's not enough? After all, states in many cases have themselves become instruments of grave tyranny. What are citizens to do when their own state governments impose onerous restrictions, regulations, and mandates upon them? In recent years, the answer has become clear. Local governments can interpose themselves between citizens and the state government by refusing to uphold unjust laws. Just as states can nullify federal laws, localities can nullify state laws. This offers a way for even very small pockets of the population to defend their natural rights when they have been in peril. A valuable strategy for the modern age. Local governments can resist state tyranny. Traditionally, the theory of nullification has only been applied to the relationship between states and the federal government. In Federalist number 46, James Madison pointed out that the state's refusal to cooperate with the officers of the Union would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. If the state used a strategy to nullify a law, the federal government would be left with no recourse. Since it cannot seize control of states' resources or coerce them into enforcing federal laws. This principle, dubbed the anti-commandeering doctrine, has been repeatedly affirmed by the Supreme Court. Instead of relying on state authorities, the federal government in such a case would have to use its own resources to enforce the federal law in that state, which, due to budgets and limited manpower, is a costly and rather unlikely enterprise that has given this strategy a successful record over the course of the American Republic. Originally being used to resist the Fugitive Slave Act and federal immigration and drug laws in modern times. But how can local governments nullify state laws? The story here is a bit different, because different states have developed under different historical circumstances. There's no single rule governing the state-local relationship. Some states are Dillon rules jurisdictions, which means that they regard the local governments as mere administrative subdivisions of the state that only have power insofar as the state delegates it to them. Other states are home rule jurisdictions, which recognize at least some degree of self-government as a fundamental right of localities. Some states are a hybrid between the two, using Dillon's rule for some local polities and extending home to rule others. In any case, all this intricacies of the state-local relationship are spelled out either in state law or in the state constitution. At the first glance, then, this appears to mean that the state holds absolute supremacy over localities. After all, it is the state's governments that get to define the relationship it has with localities, and even local autonomy granted in home rule jurisdictions exist only at the mercy of the state. From a legal standpoint, no anti-commandeering doctrine exists for cities or counties. The 10th Amendment Senator Mike Meharry is lambently declared for proponents of political decentralization. This realization is disheartening. It leads to the conclusion that the state authorities could at any time dissolve the structure of local government and turn all local officials into agents of loyal to state authorities. Meharry continued, from a strategic standpoint, activists should be wary of trying to employ a strategy created for states to use against the feds as a tool for local governments to take on the state. Many have thus written of local nullification as an impractical pipe dream, even folks who would love to see the strategy succeed. Luckily, that isn't the whole story. His criticism of local nullification, Meharry may be thinking too much about the theoretical legal structure of the state-local relationship and less about that relationship actually functions in practice. As a report from the National League of Cities points out, it is too often said that cities and counties are creatures of state law, even in states with the strongest existing version of the constitutional home rule. That proposition is technically true, but state governments are also creatures of state law, and the truism does not reveal anything definite about how any given state allocates formal legal authority between the state and local level. That is a question that a state and federal constitutional law leaves entirely to the people of each state to determine. Through the ballot box, it's ultimately the people of each state who exercise control over the sort of laws that are passed and who must assent to any changes to the state constitution in every state besides Delaware. If the structure of local government is spelled out in the state's constitution, the voters will have to ratify any would-be changes to that structure via statewide plebiscite. If the structure of local government is prescribed in statutory law, the state legislature would have the power to alter it by itself, but are only technically, of course, ever hungry for all better poll numbers, all right? State senators and congressmen would be unwilling to alter the structure of our local government if doing so violated the wishes of their constituents and invoke their fury. In fact, only one state, Connecticut, has ever managed to abolish its counties, and that's only because public opinion there came to view them as unnecessary. The legislators of any medium or large-sized state would surely never be able to get away with any such change to the local structure. It is not then that it is not legally possible for states to commandeer local resources. Rather, it's just that as a political reality, they're not able to. The state governments can interfere in local affairs. Then that means that they have a little recourse against local nullification. Local sheriffs, who are almost always elected rather than appointed to their positions, are well suited to lead these efforts, as they're beholden only to their voters and not to any state or local board. Sheriffs can simply refuse to enforce laws that, in their view, violate the principles of justice and the Constitution, and can direct their deputies to do the same. The sheriff's office is under no obligation to back unjust measures with its own local resources, and so can openly refuse to do so. To defenders of liberty, this strategy is quite promising. However, one might counter, couldn't the state government sue the removal of a recalcitrant sheriff on the ground they have failed to perform his duty? Well, they could certainly try, and it's true that sheriffs can be removed through the courts. However, law enforcement is afforded a great deal of discretionary wiggle room in their jobs. And, probably for this reason, no suit has been brought against nullifying sheriff to date. In practice, state officials have hardly any recourse at all against these sheriffs. As a practical strategy, local nullification has been shown time and time again to be rather rock solid. Not only has served counties very well in the very past few years, but the idea behind it actually stretches back before the Civil War. The role of nullification today. The idea of local nullification was first explicitly propounded by State Senator A. Douglas in 1858 during debate against his senatorial election rival Abraham Lincoln in Freeport, Illinois, and what became known as the Freeport Doctrine. Douglas proposed that towns and counties in U.S. territories could decide for themselves whether to be slave or free. The decision did not have to be made by any higher level of government. Localities could do it themselves. Despite the Supreme Court's then recent Dred Scott decision, local governments will not be bound to protect planters. Slave property. Slavery, Douglas told Lincoln, cannot exist today or an hour anywhere unless it is supported by a local police regulation. Without a regular authority capable of commandeering the local resources, slavery could be de facto abolished even if it remained officially legal. Little interesting history here, folks, right? Though there are many few key differences between Douglas's Freeport Doctrine and the local nullification efforts of today. The gist has always been the same. Following the will of local voters, law enforcement officials can and should refuse to enforce laws considered to be unjust or unconstitutional. This idea is far from new and can be adopted for a few use in various times and places. The late great Murray Rothbard, who identified the creeping of tyranny at every level of government, was enamored of Douglas's quiet local nullification. He considered it to be the one course left to the levels of freedom in the antebellum U.S. Practical, simple, and non-burdensome. Perhaps today, more than 160 years later, the principles articulated in Freeport still offer a path forward for those lovers of freedom. Already there is a Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officers Association whose 400 plus members refuse to enforce, among other things, COVID mandates and state gun control measures. The founder of the CSPOA, former Sheriff of Graham County, Arizona, Richard Mack, considered local sheriffs one of the final lines of defense against government tyranny. When you have no place else to go and all the courts are against you, all the legislators are against you, where else do you go? He asked a Washington Post interviewer. I believe, he continued, the local county sheriff, as if that means standing against the federal government, then so damn be it. Max groups of local nullifiers made national headlines this past year after vowing not to enforce mask mandates and lockdown orders in their counties. citing that those policies are oppressive and unconstitutional. Due to the nature of their voices, they thankfully haven't faced any serious repercussions. Their most heated critics could only throw a few roadblocks in the way, none of which made much difference to their efforts. Sheriff Adam Fortney of Snohomish County, Washington, faced 2 recall petitions after refusing to enforce. I thought I'm from New England there for a moment. A New Englander here. Governor Jay Inslee's lockdown order last April. Those petitions came from busybody voters in the county, not state authorities, and they both failed anyway. In December, Los Angeles County Sheriff Alex Villanueva announced his deputies will take a lax attitude toward the new stay-at-home order Governor Gavin Newsom had imposed in the counties of Southern California. In response, the furious Newsom threatened to suspend the county and any others who consider following its lead from receiving COVID relief funds. All carrot, no stick. Outside of that, the state government was without any options. Many more sheriffs across the country did exactly what Fortney and Villanueva did, successfully shielding local citizens from oppressive state orders. The same has been done to resist state gun control measures. In 2018, Governor Inslee signed into law a set of new firearm regulations, which made background checks more stringent and raised the minimum age for purchasing semi-automatic weapons. Though Washington, decidedly blue state, about a dozen sheriffs in rural counties took action to resist the new measures in part or in full. Inslee again could have compelled those sheriffs' compliance. The most he could do was instruct the state patrol to enforce the new restrictions in those counties themselves. But without the support of local departments, this is both difficult and costly. Resources of Washington's local counties simply couldn't be commandeered, nor could they in Nevada or New Mexico, where similar resistance efforts took place around the same time nullification won the day. Conclusion. Local nullification offers a practical guide to resisting tyranny in a way that reflects the real wishes of local community members against the ivory tower mentality of their government representatives. The state must be fought tooth and nail, and as the most heinous and exploitative criminal of all, it makes sense for sheriffs to have a role in this fight. Civil disobedience is all well and good, but it can often be too time-consuming or injurious to those taking part in it, which limits strategic worth. But sheriffs who have tangible power and a fair amount of autonomy can just ignore the laws that warrant disobedience and thus vitalize the efforts of the state's enemies. Short of outright revolution, such local nullification may be the last true refuge for liberty. For now, change at the state and federal levels may be a lost cause, but working a bit by bit and county by county, the forces of freedoms still have a fighting chance. You have to agree with them on that. Because I always believe in nullification. And there's some movements right now that, like I'm involved with, they do agree, think and act locally. The whole saying, plant a seed, not a no tree. So Joe Biden and his lackeys in Washington D.C., they can say whatever the hell they want. We can tell them to stick it. Even on the governor's level, too. We can say, we're not going to enforce this law. It's null and void in our jurisdiction. So that's what's fantastic about nullification. And Thomas Jefferson said it the best. It's a natural remedy. So always never toss in the towel, my friends. Our obligation, we need to be consistent of fighting oppression, one way or the other. We take disappointments by strides, we win some and lose some. That doesn't mean we'll just let it go. Okay, to pass the torch down to your loved one. Share them that knowledge. You be the elders, the wise men of the bunch. That's why I always support nullification. It is a great thing. Very good history lesson. Drug wars, of course, and the 18th Amendment, why it failed. So, I always say, keep it going, my friends. And then you spread like fire. And that will be it. So I thank everyone for listening. Plus, feel free to download and share us throughout your social media networks. If you have any questions, comments, we send us Instagram, check out. Whatever you do, please send your correspondence to the forum. Furthermore, I'll leave the footnotes of these articles on my speaker page. And I'd like to thank Downtown Saloon for having me do my show, which is located at 10 South New River Drive East along the New River of beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Southeast section of the Andrews Avenue Bridge near the county courthouse and jail. And if you want to donate, you could get me at paypal.me or cash.app/LookYourLuck3. Also known for Cash App, the $LookYourLuck3 on the go. If you want to send your contributions to Lou Rockwell and Mises.org, Mises Institute, that'd be greatly appreciated. Hey, we just want to put out the information, get everyone thinking the best we can. All right. Once again, thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that the demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love. May your guardian spirits be with you.